You're listening to This Week in E-Commerce, the Ecom Nation podcast. Dive into the top online retail headlines with your hosts, Paul Waddy and Mal Chia. Let's load up the cart. This Week in E-Commerce, episode 7. Paul, we are back. I am Mal Chia, and back with me is Paul Waddy, who's back after a 1-week hiatus. How are you, Paul?
Yeah, good. My hiatus was good. Yeah, I'm good. How are you going?
I'm doing really well. I saw that you were in Manly, speaking at an accounting conference for e-commerce, which looked like a lot of fun. Great location.
Yeah. Great location. Gave a talk there with the Kelly partners, great accountant Kelly partners on the Northern Beaches. Do lovely job with my tax and also many e-com businesses if anyone wants to check them out. We had a great event, met some really good online retailers, some that I've known from afar, some that I've never heard of. So great to see particularly some good young ones coming through as well. And I think that was 2 weeks ago. And then last Friday, we're recording on a Monday today because Friday I was in Melbourne. So yeah, a bit out of kilter, but we're back.
We certainly are. And aside from that, everything's been good. How's the family?
Everything's been good. Yeah, family's good. Another day in paradise today. Can't complain.
The
weather's great actually. I'm sitting here by the pool today. Heat pump's not working, so that's another issue. But beautiful. How's Adelaide?
Adelaide's fantastic. It's 27. The sun is out. It's quite lovely. It's kind of sad when I go outside every now and then and realize that, oh man, I'm in my office, which is fine. I spend a lot of time here, so that's okay. But when I see the sunshine, it's like, kind of wish I was out there. So I may need to start thinking about setting up some sort of outdoor setup so I can make the most of this weather. Or even just like sit in the front porch and work. See how it goes.
Absolutely. I'm just on a beanbag by the pool, and it's absolutely lovely.
Fantastic. Well, getting straight into it, we are trialing some new podcasting software, so apologies if there are some glitches. But the first topic we're going to talk about this week is Dean Salacis from the Party People. So the chief party dude himself, who is one of the better known figures in Australian e-commerce, has come out with something really cool. He's come out with a virtual mirror. Actually, it's not a virtual mirror. It's a real life-size mirror, which allows you to try on outfits at a retail space. So he's actually rolling this out at the moment in a supermarket in New South Wales during Halloween. We're ready for Halloween. So you can actually go there, stand in front of the mirror and virtually try on, up to 300 plus different outfits and then order directly from the mirror and have it shipped to your home. So Paul, do you think this is is this hot or not when it comes to retail?
You might have seen my product placement here. That was inadvertent. Clavio water bottle. I think it's hot. I think it's great. We saw it at an online retailer and both stopped and had a bit of a look, and I think it just gravitated towards it. It's obviously an in-store thing, which I think is being trialed in his store in Sydney. I love it. I think, and he even sort of said, I'm not sure how many costumes it'll sell, but I think it'll work, but it's just interesting. It will definitely get people in stores. Like it got us into the booth. It's got us talking. And I think that's part of the battle is like cutting through. So, for Dean's, like I can imagine costumes, you'd be competing against, Temu and Amazon and all sorts of, funky retailers. So I think it's a great way for Dean's business Party People to stand out. So, love the innovation and, the mind boggles as to what happens if women's fashion gets this going. I don't know if it'll be a good thing or a curse, but you could imagine my wife going and trying on 300 virtual outfits. Pretty, was that
so good for her, bad? Probably bad for you.
Yeah, does it save time or not? But very cool. I think he's done really well here.
Yeah, so do I. At the very least, it's a great PR exercise just to create a bit of noise, kind of show your innovation in the space. But the opportunities there are that, you could imagine that any retailer could now expand into bricks and mortar without necessarily needing to bring everything. You don't need to have all your stock on hand for people to try it on. They could virtually try it on and then order, and then you could still fulfill from your warehouse. So again, this continued evolution of the role of bricks and mortar. And you look at what Apple started, where you could go go there and it's basically just showcasing the product, and you could buy it there, but you didn't need to buy it there. And in a lot of cases, like you'd go there, you check it out, you order somewhere else. Sometimes they wouldn't even have it in stock. Like if you were buying like a custom, laptop, you'd still need to get that made elsewhere and then shipped to you. But it just shows that, you don't need to have a gigantic footprint. You don't necessarily need to follow the old blueprint. There are some really cool ways to continue to stand out in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's just because he's an early mover, you're not likely to see the commercial benefits right away necessarily, but that shouldn't be a deterrent, because it's like everything, 10 years ago, electric cars was like a novelty, and now they're kind of everywhere. So I think he's making the first moves, and it could become mainstream now. And if so, he'll be very well set up. So a little bit of novelty factor for now, but really cool. I'll try it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, given your Klaviyo water bottle you just held up recently, we should do a shout out to Klaviyo, who their IPO recently went live on the NASDAQ a couple of days ago, which was pretty cool. So they had a nice initial 20% bump upon opening. It's since settled down a little bit, but great to see that those guys continue to trade above their listing price, which is obviously great news for all the investors, all the venture capitalists who back that company.
Yeah, look, and it's a long-term thing. Like, I still think it's good value, and it's a long-term thing. Like Klaviyo's, as we know, just getting started really in many ways, and so is e-commerce. So you can't help but think that over the next 5 years, those investors will probably do pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back into one of our other stories is a report from KPMG with their Retail Health Index, the RHI, which is showing at the moment that the retail sector is unlikely to return to pre-pandemic levels until late 2025. And this comes off the back that we are continuing to see continued lows in that index. December 2020, it was at a +3. It fell to a low of -3 in 2022, December 2022. And then 6 months in, it's still at a very low -2.1, showing that we still do have quite a ways to grow in the retail space. And I'm trying to be a bit of an optimist in terms of retail, and I look at this and see that late 2025 is when things are going to rebound, in air quotes, which means that the recovery needs to happen sooner rather than later, and it's probably going to be a bit of a gradual recovery given the number of headwinds which we've been facing between lower consumer confidence, interest rate rises, 1 million plus Australian homes falling off a mortgage cliff. But I do tend to see that, there's got to be some sort of that recovery needs to start happening pretty soon.
Yeah, 2025 was it? Yeah, so we're nearly in 2024 now. I guess talking to you earlier, I can't remember what pre-pandemic levels were like anyway. It's been such a hectic 5 years. Obviously they were fine, but I think retail is such a big space. Like, you could talk about Coles, Woolies, like it's an enormous sector. So it's like we can't let that spook us, because that could take like a couple of multinationals reporting average sales, and the whole industry or the whole sector's reporting down. So I think we know that there are still plenty of online retailers, particularly, doing really well. I use the example of new client Proud Poppy, who has grown from 290,000 in annual revenue, like literally a hobby, to 15 mil a year, and still growing in 3 years. There's still we know heaps of businesses still growing. So the broad brushstroke that retail is not great doesn't apply to good businesses who just focus on what they're doing. You can still grow. There's still plenty of businesses out there going really well at the moment. So we just got to focus on what we're doing as business owners.
Absolutely. And like last week when I spoke with James, we talked about Lululemon, and Lulu, being one of my favorite brands, is a brand which is extraordinarily resilient to pretty much everything. They continue to grow in the face of pretty much every single kind of adversity. And the last quarter, in their earnings report, they reported something about 13 to 18% both top line revenue growth and net profit growth as well, which I find remarkable, that they've been able to continue to grow to that level, despite the fact that most of their competitors are actually seeing declines. And this isn't just like at the big end of town, but also at the smaller end of town, where you'd imagine this might be a bit more room to move, such as the Gymsharks. Gymsharks saw flattening revenues, whereas Lulu have just continued to grow. And a lot of that strength is because of the fact that they just have an unbelievable brand where people, regardless of the economic conditions, will only buy Lulu. They're not going to substitute that product. So I think if you have a great product, a really great brand, those are two really key ingredients. But KPMG also said, and Paul, you'll love this, is that they said the key to surviving and thriving over the next few months are going to be around margin management and inventory control. So
I've been saying that for 10 years.
But the two areas,
that's good. Yeah, the two areas we know is, but I think it's like, I mean, KPMG coming out and saying that is like, what else are they going to say? These are the fundamentals. Like, I'm using the example of going a little bit off topic here, but some of the businesses that have struggled a little bit over the last couple of years, and you sort of go, you see them making the wrong decisions, not making the tough decisions about renegotiating terms with suppliers, or maybe price increases or cutting costs. Those are hard decisions, and let's face it, people don't want to make hard decisions. But what I always say is, and what I was saying to a retailer last week is, you know what to do. Like, it's not, you hear it from KPMG, we're always talking about it, but whether or not we do it or not, and who has the easiest job in the world is administrators. Easiest job in the world, because you get called in and you just basically have to make that business more profitable, or if it's winding up, that's fine. And the beauty of that is there's only really one way to do that, and that's just like, see all these bills that you owe, we're not going to pay them, we're going to wriggle out of them, we're going to cut our costs. So if you went into an administrator, or an administrator was appointed, they would come in and they'll strip the costs out of your business first and foremost. So we know that's what they're going to do. So why do we allow ourselves, some businesses, to get to that point when we can be doing it proactively on a really manageable scale while we're not leaking cash? So, I think what KPMG there is doing there is stating the obvious, but it's just another one of those things that people forget about because we just want to grow and reach 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, but just good unit economics is hard to beat.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think we've both spent a lot of time with a number of founders, and one thing I always find is that when it comes to cost cutting, founders can get very emotional about it. There is a lot of emotionality attached to the fact that you made some decisions, and whether that becomes almost like a challenge. It's like, okay, well, you've made the decisions. Like, can you actually then own up to the fact that, hey, that decision which was good back in 2019 suddenly isn't so good now, and how quickly can you actually adapt your thinking? The fact that, hey, what worked then doesn't work now. So let's actually look at rebasing our costs. Let's actually look at cutting some costs. And that could mean, your subscription costs. That could mean, other operational costs. That could mean staffing, but you need to make those changes fast.
Yeah, you do, before it's too late. And the problem is, Mal, a lot of people don't even look at them. And then they look at them when it's too late, when they're like, why have I got no money? But we just got to get into the habit of looking at our numbers, scrutinizing our numbers, and I think that's where it starts. Like, you don't have to be a whiz with the numbers, but you should start to learn, and you should get into the habit of scrutinizing them at least for a couple hours every month to understand where you sit compared to the industry. Because cutting costs is quite easy. Unit economics is hard. If you're one of those businesses with lousy margins, volume doesn't fix lousy margins, and whether we like it or not. So we all want a bit of fat in our margins. And the challenge is to do that. But to also make sure that our retail prices aren't off the charts. So we have that two-step process where, one, we need a 70 or 75% margin, and two, we don't want to be selling our price, like selling way more expensive than everybody else.
Absolutely. I think, just go back down to cash flow management, looking at your balance sheet, and just make sure all those things are stacked up. So your cash flow forecast, your balance sheet, and your P&L. You got to understand those.
Yeah, and how about a tip from our business partner at Ecom Nation, our fellow director Andrew, who does a great job with our finances at Ecom Nation. 25. What does he do? Every 3 months. Talking to him about this earlier. Every 3 months, transfers 30% of his sales into a holding account. Or just to pay your BAS and so on. Such a great little tip. And just keeps you out of trouble, because we're like little kids, Mal. When we see money, we spend it. But when they take it away from us, when we don't have it, all of a sudden we become thrifty. So we've got to take it away, put it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, moving on to our last story, our major story for this week. We're going to be talking about portfolio growth versus category, just focusing on a single category. And this is something that we've talked about quite a lot, but this is prompted by an article I read in The Sociology of Business from Anna Anderlich, which is one of my favorite blogs, which Substacks, I should say, which I read. And she often talks about the fashion industry and the emerging trends coming from there, particularly from a business standpoint, not just purely from a creative standpoint. So she does talk a lot about creative industries. And what she talked about was the need for fashion brands in particular to not just focus on a single category, to actually have a broad portfolio strategy, to be focusing on multiple categories. And she uses an example such as Chanel, where Chanel is involved in a lot of different categories, from from footwear to activewear to luxury goods and accessories, to women's fashion. They're just involved in so much. Whereas other brands would be typically looking, when they launch, would just typically look to launch into a single category or a single vertical. She's advocating for launching into multiple verticals. And I know you and I have debated this a lot in terms of how many products to launch, how many categories to go into. One of our clients is actually doing quite well now because they've moved into multiple categories versus the single they were in before. Is there a right answer or a wrong answer, to this? If you're starting out, how far should you stretch things? Where should you go?
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Remember writing a comment on a blog on this or whatever on LinkedIn the other week, and people were agreeing and disagreeing. And I guess that's the key. It can be different depending on what you're in. Once again, if you've invented the thermogun, you're set for life. You don't need to evolve. But if you're in women's fashion, you've got to have a few collections covered. So I think it's a really hard one. Like when you're starting out, I think it's pretty hard to go broad, because realistically you have capital issues. You don't have that much money unless you're trying to go big and you're backed by investment from the start. The majority of us have to pick one collection and go for it, like what I call one occasion. So even thinking back to when I used to do men's shoes, I was like, well, I want to get really good at doing dress shoes, like Saturday night shoes. That's what I wanted, town shoes, as I saw on Instagram today. And that was my thing. And I was like, I want to become really good at that. And then once I wasn't growing, I did really well at that. And then I was like, I want to get bigger. Where do I go? And then I was like, okay, I want to go into the smart Sunday lunch. I call it the Sunday lunch shoes, the smart leather. And so and I think what a mistake was that I did at that point was I went, before I did that, I was like, I'm going into women's. So I went from men's into women's. And I was like, that's weird. That didn't work. There's two completely different. It was a big leap. And then when I started actually just expanding the occasions, that's when it started working. So I and the client you're talking about, we work with them as well. It's the same thing. I always think less about collections, and I've replaced that word with occasions. And I'm like, cool. So what is the occasion where I would need to wear this dress or use that bag or use that? And then even by its very nature, if you think about that, like if you think, okay, I'm going to starting a new job, I might need a wallet, I might need a briefcase, a laptop bag. There's a good little collection there. And then you can launch a collection, put a search campaign around it, do a photo shoot. I hate launching sporadic products, as you know, that have no story. I think that's crazy. But I think the middle ground is extending naturally into collections like, oh, I do leather bags, therefore I'm going to try travel, as opposed to going, yeah, I do leather bags, and now I'm going to do women's clothes. I think there are brands that can do that, like Louis Vuitton and stuff. But for the most part, I think I agree. I think I agree with her. It's like expand into collections and not huge leaps into the unknown.
And that's my thought as well. That but you start off with a narrow focus. So for me, it's like I always talked about, like if you're looking to grow your market, don't look to do like a 180. Don't try to go from one end of the spectrum to another. Do it incrementally, because at the end of the day, you need to be true to what your brand is, to your brand code, your values, and things like that. And while they may seem fairly, amorphous, things like when you talk about a brand and what is a brand and what's brand experience and things like that, the reality is that customers can actually sense it. Customers can sense when you're no longer for them, or when you make too big a leap and then they look at you and go, like, hang on, I thought you were this, now you're doing this. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I've worked with the brands before who started off, in a very, bodybuilder. I talk about Riderwear. Riderwear started off in a very bodybuilder phase, and then they grew, and then they decided to then kind of flip it and go into more like lifestyle and athleisure and, and more of that market. And they did a full 180. And by doing that, they actually lost their heartland. They lost their base. They lost those people who were very loyal to them. And then when I joined, it was then bringing it back to that base because we realized we'd gone too far. And I think with a lot of brands, like you can't get greedy. You actually got to get comfortable with leaving money on the table and going like, hey, this isn't for me, or that's not us. We need to leave it alone. So I think that power of saying no as well, that there's so much opportunity out there. Yes, you could get into, 50 different categories. You could go into like, if you're leather goods, why not make a belt? Want to make a handbag? Want to make this? Want to make that? You can make so many different leather goods. But what actually makes sense to your customers and to your brand? Like, unless you're relaunching something new, you still need to do what makes sense. So I like that idea about thinking about it in terms of occasions. What are those moments in our customer's life which we want to own? So we want to own that time where, they're traveling, or, when they're in a business meeting, that they're pulling out all these things which are of your brand, or whatever that is. But really thinking about your customer and what that occasion is, which we can really, really own. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, even thinking about women's fashion, where you can probably think, you can never have too much product. It's still about like women have, that little black dress, and then it's like you can't infinitely as a brand repeat that and iterate on it, because you'll just cannibalize. So I think there's choice, and then there's doubling down on what you're good at, but going into what I call these kind of and not all products, because we all kind of like, especially if you find a business, you get a bit of success and you're like, I'm going to do more of that and more of that and more of that. And it kind of works, but you often find that your customers there's a lot of cannibalizing. So it's really hard. Like, it's hard to build out your range and keep evolving it, but then kind of try and get people to buy two products. So you move into like leather wallets as well, or women's Sunday attire as well. Like, it is really, really hard, but it's all about finding the balance between not alienating, like you said, right away, like not alienating your community, but also trying to gently expand your addressable market as well, but in a way that doesn't turn off the first group or cannibalize too much. So product diversification is what I would say is really, really hard. But if you're one of those companies wanting to grow, like to be double each year, or 10 million, 20 million, 50, 100 million, probably you're going to have a product expansion category behind you, because otherwise probably your addressable market will just be capped. And that's also fine, by the way. Just depends on the strategy.
Well, I think part of it, you also need to, when you talk about addressable market, the world's also a really big place. So you've got to consider how much of it have you actually reached so far. And again, it goes back down to looking at it, and actually when you niche down and you look at what the addressable market is, it's probably more than what you've got now, significantly more than what you've got now. So when you think about something like, I'll go back to the riderwear and bodybuilding thing, thinking about bodybuilding was huge. Like, at no point were we ever capped out that we needed to actually shift into another market, particularly one that drastic. There's still so much room to grow. So it's also worth thinking about how much of the market have I genuinely penetrated, or even know about my brand. And a lot of us think that we've tapped it out, but the reality is that you probably just don't have enough awareness that the market is so big that most people still haven't heard of you.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? Even like, I guess the riderwear examples, like, moving into other, and a lot of people do it, moving into other audiences. But I go back to that occasion. So when I'm going to the gym, what else do I take to the gym? Surely there's other things in that group that you need, or like, I would imagine, your gym gear, you probably need like minimum 5 outfits in the wardrobe. Yeah. So it really is all about not moving along too quickly. They're even thinking about kids stuff, like kids, like some of the kids brands that I've worked with over time, moving on to like, we're going to do pets, or now we're going to go to the big kid. It's like, well, there's a lot of occasions for the kid. There's swimming, there's, bathing time, there's eating time, there's, and it's like maybe nailing those core occasions before moving into different categories.
Absolutely. That's all we got time for this week. Paul, what should our listeners be looking forward to from us over the next few weeks? We've got a lot coming up.
We do. We are hosting something with Clavio in Sydney in October. We've got a Shopify meetup in South Australia. Feel free to reach out, which I will be hosting. So feel free to, I don't know if places are gone or whatever. Feel free to ask if they're not. You're off somewhere soon.
I am. I'm speaking at the Programmatic Pioneers Conference in Summit in Singapore. So I'll be there delivering the opening keynote and closing panel, which should be fun.
Yes, bringing a bit of Aussie e-commerce to Singapore.
Yeah.
And then I'm going rural. I'm doing something with New South Wales small business. So if anyone's listening from around the Orange area, Bathurst, Mudgee, etc., I will be, don't know the dates, but you can find out somewhere. I will be going to
I believe
Orange.
you're there on the 4th, 5th, 6th.
Oh, you're right. I'm there on the 4th because it's my birthday. So 4th of October in Mudgee. There are tickets available. It's free. So just hit me up or follow me or whatever if you want to go and hear about some e-commerce, not just from me, but from Buy From the Bush and a whole bunch of great retailers and the Small Business Commissioner. So we'll be out and about over the next few weeks for sure, Mel.
Fantastic. Well, stay connected with us on LinkedIn to find out everything that's going on, or hit the website ecombination.com.au. Paul, it's been a pleasure. Good to have you back, and we'll speak later.
Talk next week.